The hero hidden in plain sight. What if I told you that the person serving you coffee this morning could be a war hero? That the janitor mopping floors at your office might have saved dozens of lives? Sometimes the most extraordinary people are hidden in the most ordinary places, doing the most ordinary jobs. And sometimes it takes just one moment of recognition to change everything. Picture this scene. It's another scorching Tuesday morning at a military base. The kind where the heat shimmers off the pavement and makes everything look like a mirage. There's this young woman standing at the entrance gate, checking IDs, logging vehicles, going through the same routine she's done every single day for months. Her name is Sarah Mitchell, and if you walked past her, you probably wouldn't give her a second glance. But here's the thing about heroes. They don't always wear capes or carry medals on their chest. Sometimes they wear standard-issue uniforms and stand at posts that everyone else considers boring, meaningless, forgettable. Sarah's story isn't one of seeking glory or chasing recognition. In fact, it's quite the opposite. Let me take you back 4 months to where this all began. Afghanistan. The name alone conjures images of desert landscapes, intense heat, and dangers lurking around every corner. Sarah wasn't even supposed to be there. She was a medical specialist barely 2.5 years into her military service. Her usual assignment? Working in the comfortable, air-conditioned medical facilities back at base. Clean, organized, predictable. But you know how life works, right? When someone drops out at the last minute, someone else has to step up. That someone was Sarah. One day she's organizing medical supplies in a sterile clinic. The next, she's being shipped off to one of the most dangerous regions in the world. Now, I want you to imagine the scene. A convoy of military vehicles rolling through the dusty roads outside Kandahar. The sun beating down mercilessly. Everything seems routine until it isn't. In warfare, that's how quickly everything can change. 1 second you're driving along, maybe thinking about home, about what you'll have for dinner, about that movie you want to watch when you get back. The next second, the world explodes. That's exactly what happened. Their convoy rolled straight into what's called a kill zone. If you don't know what that means, consider yourself lucky. It's a carefully planned trap where enemy forces have every advantage. The road erupted in explosions. The sound was deafening, like the earth itself was being torn apart. Smoke filled the air so thick you couldn't see your own hand in front of your face. Bullets started flying from every direction. In moments like these, training kicks in. But here's what separates heroes from everyone else. While most people's training tells them to find cover, to protect themselves, to survive, Sarah's training told her something different. Her job wasn't to fight. Her job was to save lives. And that's exactly what she did. Picture a young woman, barely weighing 130 pounds soaking wet, running toward danger instead of away from it. While explosions are going off around her, while bullets are whistling past her head, she's dragging soldiers twice her size to safety. These aren't small guys we're talking about. These are fully grown men in full combat gear, unconscious or barely conscious, dead weight in every sense of the term. But Sarah kept going. Her hands were shaking as she worked, patching up wounds, applying pressure to stop bleeding, doing everything she could to keep people alive. And here's the kicker, she got hit herself. A piece of shrapnel tore through her leg, and I can only imagine the pain. But did she stop? Did she call for help? Did she worry about her own injury? Not a chance. She kept working through the pain, through the fear, through the chaos. When other medics tried to evacuate her, she refused. She literally refused to leave until every single person she could possibly help was stabilized. Can you imagine that level of dedication? That level of selflessness? By the time backup arrived and the situation was under control, 12 soldiers were alive because of Sarah Mitchell. 12 families didn't have to receive that dreaded phone call. 12 mothers didn't have to plan funerals for their children. 12 fathers didn't have to fold flags and put them in display cases. But here's where the story gets frustrating, and honestly, it makes my blood boil. The military filed their report. The mission got classified. Sarah's incredible act of heroism got buried under a mountain of paperwork. Her injuries were labeled as non-critical. The entire incident was treated as just another day at the office. After her recovery, they gave her what they called an easy assignment: gate duty. Standing at the entrance of the base, checking IDs, making small talk with drivers, basically being a glorified security guard. It was the kind of job they give to new recruits who haven't proven themselves yet, or to people who are recovering from something they don't want to talk about. For Sarah, it was both. Every morning at exactly 5 a.m., she'd take her position at the East Gate. Same routine, day after day. Check IDs, log vehicles, salute when appropriate, keep her expression neutral and professional. It was the kind of duty where nothing exciting ever happens, where you become part of the background, invisible to the hundreds of people who pass by you every single day. But here's what I've learned about heroes. They don't stay invisible forever. The truth has a way of surfacing, sometimes in the most unexpected ways. So there's Sarah, going through her usual routine on what seemed like any other afternoon. The sun was particularly brutal that day, beating down on the asphalt and making everything shimmer with heat. She's probably thinking about how many hours left in her shift, maybe planning what she'd do when she got off duty. Then she sees them. A convoy of black SUVs approaching the gate. Official vehicles, the kind that usually carry important people. Sarah straightens up, professional as always, ready to check credentials and wave them through. Nothing unusual about that. It's part of the job. One by one, she checks the IDs. Standard procedure, nothing out of the ordinary. But when she gets to the last vehicle, something changes. The man sitting in the passenger seat is tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of eyes that have seen things most people can't even imagine. His ID identifies him as Commander Marcus Rodriguez, United States Navy SEALs. Sarah hands the ID back with her usual professional courtesy, ready to wave the convoy through and get back to her routine. But then something unexpected happens. The commander's eyes lock onto her name patch. "Mitchell," he says, and there's something in his voice. Something that makes Sarah stiffen with attention. For what feels like an eternity but was probably only a few seconds, Commander Rodriguez just stares at her. You can see the wheels turning in his head, like he's trying to place something, trying to remember. And then, to everyone's absolute shock, he steps out of the SUV. From air traffic control filtered through her consciousness, like a language she'd thought she'd forgotten. Thompson started rattling off their status, and gradually, his panic began to subside as he had someone to share the burden with. They were at 31,000 feet, about 40 minutes from the nearest major airport. Fuel was fine. Weather was clear. All they had to do was bring 280 people safely back to Earth. All they had to do.
Right.
As they worked through the approach procedures, Sarah's mind began to flood with memories she'd spent 8 years trying to suppress. She remembered her first solo flight, the incredible rush of being alone in the sky with nothing but skill and courage between her and disaster. She remembered the precision required, the split-second decisions, the absolute focus that flying demanded. And she remembered Marcus. They'd been flying together that day, two young pilots full of confidence and dreams. A routine flight that went horribly wrong when weather moved in faster than predicted. She'd been piloting when the microburst hit, when their small aircraft was suddenly fighting winds that could tear it apart. She'd fought the controls, done everything right, but sometimes everything right isn't enough. Marcus died in that crash. Sarah survived with nothing worse than a broken arm and psychological scars that ran deeper than any physical injury. She'd blamed herself, of course. Pilots always do. Could she have reacted faster? Made a different choice? Seen the danger signs earlier? That guilt had driven her from the cockpit and into the safe, predictable world of business consulting. No lives in her hands, no split-second decisions that could mean the difference between life and death. Just spreadsheets and presentations, and the comfortable illusion that she could control her environment. But now, 8 years later, life had dragged her back to exactly where she'd sworn she'd never be again. In a cockpit, with lives depending on her, staring down her deepest fears. Thompson was talking her through the approach procedures for the airport they were diverting to. Sarah listened carefully, her hands steady on the controls now, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought left off. The radio crackled with instructions from air traffic control, vectors and altitudes and clearances that painted a path through the sky toward safety. In the cabin behind them, 280 people waited in the kind of silence that comes with barely controlled terror. Some prayed. Others held hands with strangers. A few sent what they thought might be final text messages to loved ones. They didn't know about Sarah's history, about the accident that had driven her from flying, about the guilt and fear she'd carried for 8 years. All they knew was that their lives were in the hands of a woman from C-13F who'd said she could fly. The descent began. Sarah felt the familiar sensation of the aircraft responding to her inputs, the subtle changes in engine tone and airflow that told her everything was working as it should. But her heart was pounding so hard she could hear it over the engine noise. Her hands were slick with sweat despite the cool air in the cockpit. "You've got this," Thompson said quietly, and Sarah realized he was no longer the panicked young officer who'd been falling apart when she'd first entered the cockpit. Having someone competent beside him had restored his confidence, and now he was trying to do the same for her. The runway appeared ahead of them, a thin gray line stretching across the landscape like a lifeline thrown to drowning swimmers. Sarah began the final approach, adjusting power and attitude with the kind of precision that comes only from thousands of hours of practice. Her hands moved almost without conscious direction, reading the aircraft's needs through tiny vibrations and responses that most people would never notice. "Flaps 20, she called out, and Thompson responded immediately. The landing checklist flowed between them like a conversation, each item checked off with the calm efficiency of professionals doing what they were trained to do. But inside, Sarah was fighting the biggest battle of her life. Every instinct screamed at her to pull up, to go around, to do anything except continue this approach that could end in disaster. The memory of that day with Marcus played on a loop in her mind, the terrible sound of metal tearing, the way the aircraft had shuddered and died around them. She could fail. She could kill everyone on this plane. She could prove that walking away 8 years ago had been the right choice, that she'd never been good enough for this responsibility. 200 feet, Thompson called out, his voice steady now. The ground rushed up toward them. Sarah could see cars on the highway beside the airport, tiny dots moving along ribbons of asphalt. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that 280 lives hung in the balance just overhead. 100 feet. The runway filled her vision now, white centerline stripes flashing past as they descended toward touchdown. Sarah's hands made tiny adjustments, reading the wind, feeling for that perfect moment when the aircraft would settle onto the pavement like a bird coming home to roost. 50 feet. This was it. The moment that would define the rest of her life, one way or another. Sarah thought about Emma, asleep in her bed at home, expecting her mom to walk through the door in a few hours with a hug and maybe a small present from her business trip. She thought about all the families represented in the cabin behind her, people whose entire worlds depended on the next 30 seconds. And then she thought about Marcus, and for the first time in 8 years, she didn't feel guilt. She felt him with her, the way he'd always been during those long training flights, calm and confident and absolutely certain that she could handle whatever the sky threw at her. 20 feet. The main landing gear kissed the runway with barely a bump. The nose wheel followed a second later, and suddenly they were rolling, not flying, the aircraft bleeding off speed as Sarah applied the brakes and reverse thrust. The sound that erupted from the cabin was unlike anything she'd ever heard. Cheers and sobs and applause all mixed together in a wave of pure relief and gratitude that seemed to shake the entire aircraft. People were hugging strangers, crying, laughing, calling loved ones to say they were okay. Sarah sat in the captain's seat, her hands still on the controls, tears streaming down her face. She'd done it. They'd done it. Everyone was safe. Emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft as it came to a stop, but there was no emergency anymore. Just 280 people who'd get to go home to their families, who'd get to hug their children and continue living their lives because a woman from C-13F had remembered that sometimes courage isn't about not being afraid. Sometimes it's about being terrified and doing what needs to be done anyway. When Sarah finally walked back through the cabin, every face turned toward her. Some people reached out to touch her arm, to shake her hand, to whisper, thank you, through tears of relief. A little girl, maybe Emma's age, looked up at her with wide eyes and said, "You're a hero." But Sarah didn't feel like a hero. She felt like someone who'd finally come home after being lost for 8 years. In the days that followed, the media called her the angel from row 13F. They wanted interviews, wanted her story, wanted to turn her into some kind of inspirational figure. But Sarah mostly just wanted to go back to her quiet life with Emma, to return to the comfortable predictability of her consulting work. Except she couldn't. Something had awakened in that cockpit, something she'd buried under years of guilt and fear. She'd remembered who she used to be, who she maybe still was underneath all the safe choices and careful living. 3 months later, Sarah was back in flight training, working toward her commercial pilot's license. It wasn't easy, starting over at 34, having to prove herself all over again. But every time doubt crept in, every time the fear tried to take hold, she remembered that day. She remembered 280 people who'd trusted her with their lives, and how it had felt to deliver them safely home. Emma was proud of her mom, the pilot, though she made Sarah promise to always come home safely. It was a promise Sarah intended to keep, not by avoiding risk, but by being the best, most careful, most skilled pilot she could possibly be. Because here's what Sarah learned that day at 30,000 feet, something that took 8 years and a desperate captain's announcement to understand. Running from your fears doesn't make them go away. It just makes you smaller. And sometimes, when the world needs you most, fear becomes irrelevant next to the simple human necessity of doing what's right. Now, I want you to think about your own row 13F. What's that thing you've been running from? That skill or calling or dream you've convinced yourself you're not ready for anymore? What would happen if life suddenly demanded that you step up, that you remember who you used to be before fear made you settle for less? Maybe you won't ever have to land a plane full of strangers. But somewhere out there, someone needs exactly what you have to offer. Someone needs your particular combination of skills and experience and courage. Someone needs you to stop hiding in the comfortable middle seats and move up to where the real action is. The question isn't whether you're ready. Sarah wasn't ready either. The question is whether you'll answer when life calls your name. Because sometimes the most extraordinary thing about ordinary people is their willingness to be extraordinary when it matters most. Sometimes a sleeping passenger becomes a hero. Sometimes row 13F becomes the most important seat on the plane. Your moment might not come with a captain's announcement and panicked passengers. It might come as a job opportunity you don't feel qualified for, or a relationship that requires more vulnerability than feels safe, or a creative project that demands you risk failure in pursuit of something beautiful. But when it comes, remember Sarah. Remember that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's the decision that something else is more important than fear. Remember that you don't have to be perfect to be exactly what someone needs. And remember that sometimes the thing you're most afraid of returning to is exactly where you're meant to be. So, here's my challenge for you. Stop hiding in row 13F. Stop sleeping through the moments when life asks if you're ready to step up. Stop letting fear convince you that your best days are behind you or that you're not qualified for what's ahead. The cockpit is waiting. The controls are there. And somewhere, someone needs exactly what you have to offer. Are you ready to answer the call? If this story made you think about your own untapped potential, if it reminded you that courage lives inside all of us just waiting for the right moment to emerge, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what your own row 13F moment might be. What's that thing you've been running from that might actually be exactly where you need to go? And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge you to see your own life differently. Because sometimes one story can change everything about how we see ourselves and what we're capable of. Thanks for flying with us today. Now go be the hero someone's been waiting for.